Okay, great. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission meeting for Wednesday, October 14th, 2020. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the
United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands,
one
nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Cookie, could you please do call roll?
Yes. Commissioner Reyes?
Present.
Commissioner Robbins?
Here.
Commissioner Lorraine?
Here.
Vice Chair Nunez?
Here.
And Chair Rowinski?
Here. Okay, great. With all commissioners here, I'm just going to make a reminder, due to the current physical distancing protocols in place, the city encourages public participation remotely. There are two ways for the public to comment this evening. For people joining the meeting by video, click the Zoom meeting link found at the top of the meeting's agenda. Use the raise your hand button to be called on. And when called on, please let us know who you are and provide your comments. The other way for people to join our meeting is by phone. That is calling 408-638-0968. Once again, 408-638-0968. And entering conference ID 86 96 20 35 20 and the number 6. Once again, 86 96 20 35 20, the number 6. Pressing pound, and then pressing *9 to raise your hand to be called on. When called upon, press *6 to unmute. And once again, please let us know who you are and provide your comments. The video and phone options for all public comments will remain available until all comments have been made to the commission for a specific agenda item. And once again, I want to thank staff for their time and work in making tonight's remote meeting and public participation possible. The first item on tonight's agenda is the consent calendar. There is one item, that is to approve the minutes from the Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission regular meeting of September 9th. Do I have a motion?
Yes, I would move to approve these minutes.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Cookie, a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Reyes?
Yes.
Commissioner Lorraine?
Yes.
Vice Chair Nunez?
Yes.
Chair Rowinski?
Yes.
And Commissioner Robbins?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next item on our agenda is public comment. This is for persons wishing to comment on an item not appearing on tonight's agenda. State law prevents the commission from acting on any matter not on the agenda. However, comments are welcome. The commission will take note of them and may consider them for inclusion into future commission meetings. Cookie, do we have any speakers?
I'm showing 3 hands raised. I just want to make sure that this is for items that are not on the agenda. I have the first one is Karen Grove, then Eric Wolford, and then Drew. So if that is correct, I will unmute Karen.
Okay, thank you. Our speakers, you will have 3 minutes to speak. And what I will do is I'll inform each speaker when there's a minute left and 30 seconds left to complete your comments to the commission.
Okay, my name is Karen Grove, and I am calling in to comment on Measure RR, this being the Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission. Measure RR saves Caltrain from shutdown and improves the system, providing faster and more frequent trains better connections to local transportation networks, and cleaner, quieter trains that will reduce noise and air pollution. At peak commute hours, Caltrain currently carries the equivalent of 3 lanes of freeway traffic. And studies indicate that Measure RR will put the equivalent of 2 lanes of traffic onto Caltrain by running trains more frequently. When the pandemic ends, if we don't have Caltrain, our highways and roads will become parking lots. And it's hard to imagine how we will meet our climate goals without the improvements Measure RR will fund. It is important to note that Measure RR requires a 2/3 vote to pass, so every vote matters. Your vote is your voice. Please speak for the planet. People can learn more about Measure RR at greencaltrain.org. Thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you, Karen. I do appreciate your comment and staying within the time. Thank you.
The next one is Eric Wolford.
Eric, please. Once again, at 1 minute, I'll let you know, and 30 seconds to complete your comments.
Very good. I will try to be brief. My name is Eric Wolford, and I am a neighbor San Matean, and I live in North Central San Mateo. And I am here today to advocate for bike infrastructure through North Central San Mateo, and particularly on the South Delaware Street corridor. And I would just like to say that I am familiar with and have read the update to the Bicycle Master Plan, which does include many bike improvements throughout San Mateo, and I support this. However, I feel that there are some issues with the Bicycle Master Plan as it relates to the lived experience as a person living in North Central San Mateo. This area of our city, North Central, is one of the lower income areas of the city and one of the more disadvantaged areas in terms of access to basically all services, including bike infrastructure. The San Mateo Bike Plan from 2011 actually had bike route through North Delaware Street and onto South Delaware Street. The updated bike plan actually does away with that. And I would just encourage each of you to please at some point just go open up a Google browser and type in Strava Global Heat Map, Strava as in the GPS activity logger. You'll see that the vast majority of bikers in North Central go through North Delaware Street, which is basically going to have its bike access done away with as it relates to the updated bike master plan. And furthermore, going northbound on Delaware Street from the south, our current bike lanes end at 5th Avenue and dump traffic, biking traffic onto the basically 4-lane road between 5th and 1st Avenue. It's a significant problem, and it'd be a perfect target for a quick build type of scenario to basically remove 1 lane of traffic between 5th and 2nd Avenue on Delaware Street, just to evaluate that. It's also an important area related to the fact that bike collisions have been occurring there since the bike master plan in 2011 and continue to occur there based on the bike master plan approved this year. So sure. I would just strongly advocate to please understand that the bike plan is important it's important to have the plan, but it's also important to know that it's a fluid and mutable thing based on the needs of San Mateans, and specifically North Central San Mateo would benefit from better bike infrastructure on Delaware Street. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And completing your comments to us within time. Much appreciate.
Okay.
If I may make one comment, if the chair okays it. We might encourage Mr. Wolford to submit his comments by email, which can then be forwarded to relevant staff and have all the details properly captured as he wishes to convey them.
Sure. Yep.
I'd be happy to do that. Thank you.
The next person I have is Drew.
Drew, please, once again, I'll give you a 1 minute and 30 seconds in terms of time to complete.
Good evening, members of the commission. So I have more of a technical feedback, public comment. I would ask that this commission, that the password to Zoom gets published as part of on the website along with the meeting ID. I type in the conference ID into Zoom, and then I get a password prompt. I've only am running into this in the city of San Mateo. Other cities, other organizations like the JPB, CCAG, a bunch of them, they all show, like, release the password. There's other ways. Some don't have a password and they control it on the admin side. I run into problems joining the meetings sometimes because you have to click the link in the agenda. So then, like on my computer, I don't have a whole video audio system set up, but I have it on the iPad. It works really nice. But I keep hitting this password prompt. But if I've got a browser opened and sometimes it works, like tonight it worked, I'll click on the link and then it'll open Zoom and it'll push in the password and stuff. So I know there's stuff around security, but I do think pretty much every other meeting I attend, except the city of San Mateo, they're able to manage this. So I'm just asking, let's get the password, and then you can just type in the meeting ID into Zoom, you type in the password, and you're good to go. So that's my request. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Drew. Drew, can you reach out to Patrice Olds?
I did, and let her know about this problem with the city council ones. And she said she thought there was a setting also in Zoom where if you dial in on a phone and it'll say, do you have your password? If you don't, just hit the pound sign and it'll let you get through that step. And she thought in the Zoom on the video side, there also was a setting to essentially do the same thing. And I'm not sure, there's a bi-weekly meeting that attends some of this technical stuff. And I don't know ultimately what panned out over the last month and a half on that or something.
Sure.
So.
And, but yeah, she manages all this. Is also, Jonathan, are you on? Jonathan? Okay.
Madam Chair, I think we get the message. We can pass it on to the tech people.
Right. Okay.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Any more participants? Any more speakers?
I see no more hands raised.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Karen, Eric, and Drew for your comments. We're going to move now to the new business section. There are 3 topics of discussion, 2 of which will require a roll call vote. The 3 new business topics include the downtown parking garage pedestrian safety project, the temporary storage containers in public right-of-way, and the disposable food service ware policy. So we'll start off with the downtown parking garage pedestrian safety project. Here, staff is looking for is going to provide an update and is looking for feedback not only from the commission, from the public. There is no motion and thus no roll call for this particular agenda item. The presentation for the pedestrian safety project will be done by Nicolette Chan, Assistant Transportation Planner for the City of San Mateo, and Shurti, who works with Advanced Mobility Group, the group that advised the city on this particular safety assessment. After the presentation, that will be followed by questions from the commission and questions from the commission, and then we'll reach out to the public for comment made by phone or video. And once all public comments are heard, I will bring the discussion back to the commission for final questions, and please limit your questions to 2 if you have any, and comments from the staff. So with that, Nicolette and Shurti.
Thank you. So good evening, commissioners. Thank you for having us tonight. My name is Nicolette Chan, and I am a transportation planner for the city's Public Works Department. Tonight, I will be presenting with Shruti Shrivastava from Advanced Mobility Group on the downtown parking garage pedestrian safety project. On the agenda for tonight, I will begin by introducing the project and reviewing the existing conditions assessment. Shruti will then present the proposed recommendations, and I will wrap up with next steps for this project. So this project will recommend and install pedestrian safety improvements at the entrance and exit locations of Central Parking Garage, Main Street Parking Garage, and Second El Camino parking garages, as shown on this slide. There have been reports of near misses or close calls between vehicles and pedestrians, particularly at our parking garage driveways. And so this project aims to reduce the potential for those collisions and also enhances makes our downtown more pedestrian friendly, makes it a more pedestrian friendly environment. We are in the first phase of the project, which includes identifying existing pedestrian safety concerns and then recommending improvements for those concerns, and finally developing concept plans for the recommended improvements. The concept plans will be used to guide implementation of constructing the recommended improvements in phase 2 of the project. So many different techniques were used to observe and gather existing conditions at the study locations. AMG and city staff from the Public Works and Police Department conducted a walking audit in early July, where we visited each study location and evaluated existing conditions. We also posted an online community survey from August 3rd to August 14th on the city's social media platforms. Participants were asked to respond to questions looking in the future and in the past when they visited downtown, since the survey was conducted during the pandemic. AMG staff conducted a collision analysis using data collected near the parking garage driveways. And they also revisited the study locations at night to conduct a field review and examine conditions in the evening hours. The information gathered was consolidated in the existing conditions memorandum, which is attached to the staff report. And that memorandum identifies the needs that apply to all parking garages, as well as needs for specific garage locations. The online community survey received a total of 274 responses. Respondents were categorized into 2 main groups. Group A were those that pass by the parking garages, whether that be on foot, bicycle, or other personal mobility device. And Group B were those that park in the parking garages, and therefore they use the entrance and exits to walk in and out. Both groups identified site visibility and lighting as major issues at our parking garages. Other issues that were identified included lack of security, cleanliness, accessibility, and lack of ADA improvements. The findings also show that the top 3 most desired improvements that were identified by both groups A and B were visual aids to see oncoming vehicles, better lighting, and more signage directing to the pay stations. And with that, I will pass it over to Shruti.
Thank you, Nicolette. As Nicolette mentioned, during our field review, we identified needs at each location at each parking garage entrance and exit location. The needs and the issues were categorized into general and site-specific issues. Some of the general issues that were observed at all of the parking garage entrance and exit locations included worn-out signing and striping, insufficient lighting, lack of ADA-compliant treatments such as truncated domes and curb ramps, limited site visibility for vehicles and pedestrians, lack of security cameras at the second and El Camino parking garage, need for skid and trip resistant surface in front of the driveways, and need for vertical clearance fixture upgrades. Some of the site-specific issues at each of the parking garages, starting with the central parking garage, include lack of pedestrian visibility and access to the pay stations, no keep clear signage on Ellsworth, and no left turn restrictions exiting the entrance exit locations. At the Main Street garage, we observed that the left turn going into the garage on First Avenue was faded and needed to be replaced. Additionally, the parking entrance and exit only signs needed to be upgraded so that the drivers could see them better. And there was a need for additional wayfinding signage for pedestrians to access the main street alley instead of the entrance and exit locations of the garage to access the garage. At the second and El Camino parking garage, we observed that there was limited access to pay stations, limited site visibility and access to the alleyway, and no crosswalk at the El Camino alleyway entrance. Based on the issues identified during our existing conditions assessment, AMG and the city developed a technical memorandum summarizing the recommended improvements. The recommended improvements were that we, based on the issues that we experienced, included updating the signing and striping to California MUTCD compliant treatments, upgrading interior and exterior lighting where applicable, installing curb ramps and ADA and truncated domes on the sidewalks in front of the garage driveway, installing pedestrian and vehicle warning visual and audible feedback devices and convex mirrors, security cameras, as well as parking enforcement signs, and upgrading the sidewalk and vertical clearance fixtures. We developed preliminary cost estimates based on for the recommended improvements. The city had identified funding for the project, and the recommended improvements can be installed within the identified funding. With this, we can talk about the next steps.
Thank you, Shruti. Following tonight's meeting, we will be finalizing the recommendations memorandum by incorporating feedback from the commissioners and feedback from public comment. We also presented to the Downtown San Mateo Association last night, and their feedback will also be incorporated. Next, we will be developing preliminary concept plans and cost estimates that will help guide implementation of the recommended improvements during phase 2 of the project, where we construct the improvements. And that concludes staff's presentation. We welcome your feedback on the recommendations and are available to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, Nicolette and Shruti. As I mentioned, we'll start with questions from the commissioners, and once they're exhausted, we'll reach out to the public and then come back with to the commission with final comments. And if you have a question, once again, keep it to no more than 2. Commissioner Lorraine, can we open up with you on this?
Sure, thank you. What prompted this project to begin at this time?
That is a good question. Sue Ellen, can I defer to you?
Sure. Hi, Sue Ellen Atkinson, Principal Transportation Planner in Public Works. This project was identified about 2 years ago, and the phases of the project were budgeted into the CIP budget in the last fiscal year and in this fiscal year. We just had competing priorities and staff workload issues that pushed the RFP process for this project. And then when we were ready to start, the COVID pandemic had already started, but we interviewed consultant teams with an eye toward different public engagement and field review options based on the current pandemic conditions, and we're able to move the project forward regardless of the current world situation.
Excellent. Thank you, Sue Ellen. And I was just wondering why the downtown train station parking lot and the Fifth Avenue tennis court parking lot were not included. I was thinking maybe with regard to the smaller lots, maybe I can see there not being a similar need to assess issues. For example, if you're not, if it's not multi-level but I think those are 2 that strike me as lots that are, similar to these and also downtown. Could you maybe help me understand why those are not included?
Yeah, so we felt that compared to those parking lots, these particular parking garages, the way the structure is, it really has a limited sight visibility of pedestrians. So when the vehicles are approaching the exit, they really can't see the pedestrians right around the corner from the structure. And same thing goes for pedestrians. They aren't able to see cars coming until the cars are right up against the sidewalk.
If I could add to that for a moment also, the transit center garage has a separate pedestrian exit and entry via the staircases at the station, so there's not as much conflict between pedestrians and vehicles. And similarly at the tennis court garage, there's a separate pedestrian ramp at either side of the garage in addition to stairs that also serves the same to keep the pedestrians and vehicles separated. So for this first project regarding improved pedestrian safety at the garages, we wanted to focus on the three that had the primary vehicle and pedestrian conflict points.
I see. Okay, so there may be an opportunity, because I imagine, for example, one finding it seems of this project is there are a number of sort of general updates, ADA compliance updates and/or improvements that I presume could be made at some point to like the Fifth Avenue tennis courts lot as well. But that would be, is that something that may be completed at a later date?
It may be. I think now that we have those tools in our pocket and our community can get used to how these tools are being used, that we could make it more consistent in our downtown should they be needed to address safety issues.
Thank you. I think, oh, yeah, I think did you say you wanted to start with two per commissioner, Ms. Nowinski?
Oh, no. On this round, Commissioner Lorraine, this is your opportunity to ask many questions. It's when we wrap up with our final comments. If you have a question or two, a burning question or two for staff before you deliver your final comments, that's where I'd like to just limit them to one or two.
Thank you, Chair Nowinski. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask one more at this time, please. Thank you. Regarding the online survey, I guess I'm just curious about maybe what the target number of respondents might have been if there was such a target, and whether there are any standardized protocols for trying to get feedback for maybe like public works projects. I feel like I'm a little naive and should perhaps know the answer to this, but I thought I would just take this opportunity to clear the air and see if it's different from project to project based on those whom we work with, or if there are standards that the city follows each time.
Mm-hmm.
I was muted. I think it really depends on who the target audience is, and then the project team can come together and really brainstorm what is the best way to get to that targeted audience. In this case, we couldn't, set up a booth downtown and ask people. So we felt that the survey was best, but definitely, if we had other opportunities to be in person, we would have done that for this project.
I see. Okay. Those are my questions for now. Thank you.
All right. And let me just reiterate, not to cause confusion, when we're first going through a first round of questions, it's, there's no limit in that. What I have observed is, as we're wrapping up with final comments, that commissioners do have questions. And so I want to allow that, but I'd also ask that we limit that section to, what I would say are, these one or two questions I really have to ask and whatnot before providing my final comments. So I just want to make that clear to all the commissioners. Commissioner Reyes, questions?
Thank you. Thank you for this work. Certainly, I think speaking for myself, I've always had a little bit of trepidation walking on those sidewalks, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. And in fact, the survey does seem to register the same in terms of people's level of comfort. Only 35% reported that they felt safe or very safe. So it's certainly appropriate that we're taking a look at this. There was reference to the Downtown Association. Sorry, I think I missed it. Have we received, or are we still waiting to receive the input from the Downtown Association?
Yeah, the Downtown San Mateo Association meeting was yesterday, and we presented the same presentation we did tonight to them and gathered their feedback already.
And the feedback was?
They didn't have too much. They talked mostly about the lighting and security. They wanted clarification on security cameras, and Officer Garcia was on there, and he clarified that the only parking garage from the study that currently does not have cameras is Second and El Camino.
Okay. And a minor question with regards to the survey. It looks like, we had about a little over 250 respondents to some of the questions, but then some of the questions only have under 100 respondents. So is this related to the two different groups that you made reference to? So one group has under 100 and then the other one has the balance?
Yeah, so in the survey, they started with some general questions, and then depending on if they answered one of the questions, depending on how they use the parking garage, one of the questions was, how do you interact with it? Do you simply walk by it, or do you actually park in the garage? And depending on what their answer was to that, it brought them to a different set of questions that worded it differently.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And if this plan moves forward, what would be the time frame under which the improvements would be made?
Sure. So we are still in the first phase of the project, and during phase 2, we will finalize the concept designs, and we will have to go out to bid for the construction portion. So I would estimate late 2021 to early 2022.
Okay. And again, that's to account for the design process and then the construction RFP. Okay. Okay. I have no further questions. Thank you for your work on this.
Commissioner Nunez, questions?
Thanks, Nicolette and Shruti, for your presentation. My first question was also about the security cameras, but you already answered that, so thanks. My next question was about whether we heard any concerns on the survey about the no left turn exiting the 3rd Avenue garage. And the reason I ask is because I see cars making left turns when exiting that garage quite often, and I see that it poses a safety concern just for the pedestrians who are crossing the street there. So I'm wondering if there was any discussion or concerns about that in the survey.
So we did not, when looking at the survey, also let the pedestrians, let the respondents write down their comments, and we did not see one for the 3rd Avenue making a left turn. Based on our existing assessment and the 12 locations that we identified, and especially at the central parking garage, specifically on Ellsworth, there are no left turn signs, and that was recommended because of the short distance under the bridge. We do need a no left turn sign there to avoid the number of conflicts that might occur.
Great. Yeah, I think that the sign for the garage on 3rd Avenue is quite small, and I'm wondering if that's just if the reason why people continue to ignore that sign is for that, because they don't see it, or I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to call more attention to that sign I'm not sure if it's being enforced.
We are also upgrading and relocating all these existing signs so that they are more visible to all of the drivers exiting the garage. So as a part of the study, we will be upgrading all of the signage and relocating it to a location where it is easily identifiable.
That's great. Thank you. My last question is a little bit unrelated to the pedestrian safety, but it is a comment that I saw throughout the survey. It's related to the pay stations, and I was wondering if the city had explored transitioning the pay stations to include credit cards and or Apple Pay or virtual digital pay. The reason I ask that is just because I see a lot of people, not paying a lot of times, and so I think that is a huge opportunity.
If Nikki doesn't mind, I'll take that question. That is an excellently timed question. We have the Downtown Parking Technology Project that we received a grant for in 2015. We did the design for that project and went out to bid a few times for construction on that project. We awarded last year, and we are starting installation of new single space meters at the end of this month. New multi-space pay stations coming in toward later November or so, and that's for on-street and off-street. We have plans to remove a lot of the single space meters and swap them for multi-space pay stations. And then we're expanding pay by phone mobile payment throughout the downtown, so we'll be able to pay by smartphone for parking. So we're very, very close on that. And all of the pay stations and single space meters will have cash and credit options.
It's amazing. I can't say that I haven't been one of those people before, so that has forgot coins or cash. So great. Thanks so much. That I don't have any further questions. I appreciate it.
Okay, great. Thank you. I just have a few questions. Actually, Sue Ellen, I'm glad to hear about the pay stations, and I'm also glad to hear it's cash, credit card, and I'll just say e-wallets using phones, for lack of a better term, whatever system you use, because that's what people use. And going back to a comment Commissioner Nunez made is people not paying and taking a chance of not getting ticketed. So I appreciate here. It's good news that we're hearing that. I just have a couple of questions, and I want to go back to the security matter, particularly as it relates to cameras. You mentioned that it's only the second in El Camino garage that does not have cameras. So my first question is, do the other two garages have adequate numbers of cameras? They might have cameras, but do we have an adequate number, and or are they adequately placed? I don't know. I didn't see anything about that in the survey, but I'm going down a couple of levels as it relates to cameras. Adequate number and properly placed. Yeah.
Based on our field assessment and talking to the police officer Garcia, he did mention that there were sufficient cameras and they were functioning well at the two Main Street and the central parking garages. And he mentioned that the only one that did not have one, like we had mentioned, was the second in El Camino. But he did not mention any issues with the two parking garages.
Okay. And so the camera feeds go directly into the police department, and assuming that somebody's monitoring this at the other end, yes. Is what's going on. So what I hear saying is Officer Garcia did not bring up, nor did anybody ask about additional cameras or where to put them. I understand. Okay. And that might be that might be a follow-up question, just to confirm with them. If you don't raise the question, they might not have thought about it. Because I think security and lighting is really important. And I just want to I will bring that question to your attention just to confirm and raise that question with the police. Likewise, I'm assuming that this design, since the second and El Camino garage doesn't have security cameras, that what will be designed into that garage will be adequate number and adequate placing. And that feed, I'm assuming, is a 24/7, 365 feed into the police department. Is that correct? Okay, thank you. Another question I had is, in the presentation, it mentions that there's no parking between 2 and 5 a.m. And once again, that's a security issue. I understand that. How was 2 to 5 selected? Is there a state law? Is it what is typical of garages? Because, if you look at garages, you have loiterers and you might have homelessness. You can have theft. So I'm assuming if the signs are put up between 2, so I guess I have 2 questions here. Why 2 to 5 a.m.? And then next question is, whatever the hour is, whatever that range is, let's say 2 to 5, does that mean, for example, if I see somebody parking at 3:30 in the morning, I call the police? Is that how that is supposed to work? It's supposed to inform someone not to park here, and likewise, it's supposed to inform someone if they do see it to call.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Shruti.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say 2 to 5 a.m. is our current policy. And when we visited each parking garage, it was the police department that notified us that there isn't enough signage. And that way you're correct. It is harder to enforce the parking garages when there's lack of or no signage at all to show that the garage is closed during those times. As for the historical perspective of why those hours were chosen, I will defer to Sue Ellen.
Thanks. I would have to say that that's been city policy as long as I've been here and prior to my time with the city, to ensure that there's no overnight parking allowed in the garages. We don't have gate arms at our garages, so the closure is that there's no parking allowed between 2 and 5. To the hypothetical situation of seeing someone parking at 3:30, that could certainly be something that one could call the police non-emergency line for. But there are police out at all hours of the day who do go through the parking garages in the evenings and the wee hours of the morning. And yeah, agreed with Nicolette that there is additional signage that's necessary to that effect.
Right. Okay. So 2 to 5 has always 2 to 5 is there to dissuade, for lack of a better term, overnight parking.
Correct.
Which can and cannot, it can pose security. I understand that. But the need for more signage, one, to alert those that want to stay there, park there between 2 and 5, and alert those who might see it and maybe prompt a call to the police. Okay. All righty. Okay. That's all of my questions. I think if we move to the public at this.
Excuse me.
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Robbins. I am sorry. My apologies.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, staff, for your hard work on this and the outside consultant. A couple questions. Let's see. The estimated costs. I was trying to cobble together what the total budget would be, not counting staff time, which is valuable, but is sort of an ongoing cost we have. I see that, it's page 77 of this thing, about $332,000 for if all these elements are implemented, but that I don't think includes the consultant, the design, and all the process. Do we have, and maybe I just missed it, do we have an estimated budget for this?
We do have a budget that is set aside this fiscal year for the construction, and we have confirmed that it is enough to cover the preliminary cost estimate amount as well as staff time.
Okay, that's in this year's budget. We don't have, do we have a total number? Because we're talking about completing this thing well into the next fiscal year, right?
Yes, we have 520,000 total.
520. And okay, and we definitely have budget in this year. We usually do budgets in 2-year increments, at least I seem to recall, but we don't have that budget out yet. Okay, the sort of down in the weeds a little bit, the vehicle warning devices, which in my comments later on, I'll indicate I'm a big fan of, more so than some of the other items. I was having a little trouble trying to cross-reference, and I'll admit I didn't go out to each garage, though I've been to them all at one time or another. Are all, under the proposal here, is there one such device at each exit? Because you show, again, it's on 77, and again on page 63, there's some checks and X's, you know, it's on with this side, that side. What I don't know is whether we're missing an exit, or all the exits would be covered with those.
Yes, the vehicle warning devices will be present at all the exits.
Excellent. That sounds great. And then my last question's already been taken, which is the timing, but I'll just nudge that, you know, if we can get the budget for it, this is, probably swamp into the comments period, but given the desperation of most of our businesses downtown, the ability for people to park there is growing, and there are pedestrians wandering around. I think this is a pretty urgent safety matter. It'd be nice to get it moved sooner rather than later. That's it for now. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. We'll move to public comment. Cookie, do we have anyone who's would like to comment on this particular project?
Yeah, yes, I see a hand raised by Drew.
Okay, all right. Okay, Drew, once again, I'll give you a 1 minute and a 30-second to complete your comments. Thank you. Please.
Hello again. This is one of those projects kind of snuck up on me, at least. Somehow I missed the community survey and stuff, and it's just really great to see. It looked nice and solid and thorough, and I very much appreciate like the nighttime, going at nighttime and not just doing daytime surveys. I was wondering, one thing on the nighttime, was that like an evening one or more like 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. when maybe like the movie theater lets out? So just a little bit around that, or maybe there's a second survey quick to do on that. And then feeding off of a couple comments some commissioners made, I do wonder about the 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. window. It's not directly this project's job to adjust, but there's workers. Do all the workers leave at that time? How about in the morning? They have to come and get there. And the goal to clean out, get the garage, no overnight parking, is that conflicting with our equity goals to, you know, the working people have a place to park and stuff like that, especially with all the parklets taking up parking spots, things. So, and then one of the commissioners talked about the other two garages, and I do would think that a quick review, it could be on paper, maybe not even a site review, but just going through some of the learnings that are being applied to here. I would think the low-hanging fruit could be applied to those other garages. Just, you know, if it's some paint and some signs and stuff, those are just things. So all downtown parking is consistent. You know, if it gets too budgety, maybe some flashing signs that has to wait. And then the other one is, since you've done this great job, I'm wondering, is this feeding in, this information, like you've gathered all this information, would feed into the new Fifth Avenue garage that's being designed across from Mid-Penn Housing? That's a lot of public parking there. There's some learnings you've had that I think could feed into that. And then also there's a development happening across from the tennis courts on a lot that I remember it's going to have some circuitous ramps and stuff to get into some parking above. And I don't know if that's city parking or maybe it's private parking. So again, feeding into the learnings you've done. So, you know, it's consistent across all of downtown, but this was, it was great to see the work done here. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Drew. Cookie, other speakers?
I see no other hands raised.
Okay, thank you. Okay, at this point, we'll bring it back to the commission for a final question and comments. I'll start with Commissioner Reyes.
No further questions or comments. I'm excited to see this moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Lorraine?
Thank you. No further questions. I will just say that it's great work that I look forward to seeing implemented, and it's just unfortunate that the timing of the project has us conducting outreach in ways that we would not prefer, and potentially not getting as much as we'd like, and having to ask people to think back to when we were busier downtown. That's it's unfortunate, but I would agree with staff that that's not necessarily a reason to delay anything. And indeed, I presume most of the findings would be the same. And as somebody who walks and bikes downtown a lot, I would concur with Commissioner Nunez that and Reyes and others who have mentioned it, that I look forward to seeing some of these improvements implemented to make downtown more walkable, more useful to active transportation as well as drivers. And thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Robbins.
No further questions. I would just want to emphasize that to the extent they need to prioritize, or we need to prioritize anything, I think the vehicle warning, both lights and audible, give the most bang for the buck in terms of safety. And a lot of the other items are less expensive, but they have less impact. So I would just suggest that we consider putting those warning devices up on the list if possible. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Nunez.
Just echoing a lot of the comments that other commissioners have said, I think this is a really huge piece of the puzzle in really ensuring the safety of our pedestrians in the downtown area. I know I myself have felt unsafe crossing and just being in the garages at night at times. So I want to underscore Drew's comment as well. I think these findings, I hope these findings are really applied to the Fifth Avenue garage as well. And one point on outreach for future surveys is, especially when we're trying to get feedback about specific geographic locations, is considering putting flyers at those locations. So at the garages, especially when the survey time is so short, for I think it was like 11 days. And so considering flyers with QR codes that are in multiple languages so that folks can take the survey when they're around in downtown, maybe sitting by the garages. And then lastly, I think there's an opportunity also to think about our garages as public spaces that we can even share information. And so I know this is a little bit unrelated to pedestrian safety, but just creating a more welcoming environment for people who are around the garages is having a community board, kind of like the ones that are on the underpass of Caltrain, just to share information about city services and services that might benefit the people that may be passing by the garages. And lastly, I just will commend staff and consultants. I think this is just these are much needed improvements. And I think the recommendations are really reflective of what was heard on the survey. So thanks so much for your work on this.
Okay, thank you. No questions, but I'll just a few final comments here. And I'm going to echo something that Commissioner Robbins had mentioned earlier, that is getting this project going and in doing so, support our downtown businesses. Though, unless the garages, and I'll share, if I don't feel safe in a garage, I'm not going to be parking there. And so I cannot underestimate the need for cameras and signage and enforcement. And particularly in evening hours. And the evening is long. Right now we're going into longer nights. So I cannot underestimate that. Like I said, I think it's much needed. Any way we can go in and support our downtown businesses. And then I'm going to pick up on a comment that Commissioner Nunez said as well. Appearance. Is there ways to use, you talked about a community board, but, is there a way to make this brighter and lighter through the use of colors and paints and possibly simple patterns that would welcome, I'm not going to say quite welcome people in, but lighten up the mood of a parking garage. I think that would also go a long way, though outside the scope of your assessment, I do want to mention that. And those are my 3 comments. So with that, I want to thank Nicolette and Shorty and Sue Ellen for your time and interest. I'm wanting to receive feedback both from the public and the commission. So thank you. The next item on the new business section is temporary storage containers in public right-of-way. The objective of this item is for the public and the commission to receive an update and to provide feedback to Public Works staff. And because this item requires a recommendation to City Council due to the creation of new fees and an amendment to the city's encroachment permit process, a roll call vote will be taken at the end of this agenda item. Our presentation will be done once again with Nicolette. Welcome back, Nicolette, Assistant Transportation Planner for the City of San Mateo. And once again, following Nicolette's presentation, we'll open up with rounds of questions to the commission, and at that point, then reach back out to the public. So, Nicolette.
Hello again, commissioners. I'll reintroduce myself. My name is Nicolette Chan, and I am a transportation planner for the city's Public Works Department. Next, tonight, I'll be presenting about temporary storage containers in the public right-of-way. Overview for tonight's presentation, I'll start with what a temporary storage container is, and then review the city's current policies and procedures on them. Next, I'll review staff's analysis on how other cities permit storage containers in the right-of-way. And lastly, I will present staff's recommendations on how we can permit storage containers on the street. First, for some background. A temporary storage container is also known as a portable on-demand storage, or POD. They are enclosed containers used to temporarily store household items, and residents typically use them for moving purposes. Staff have received an increasing number of requests for storage containers on the street. Currently, containers may be placed on private property without a permit. However, many of the requests received by staff are from residents who live in multifamily housing or who have insufficient space on private property, and therefore they cannot store the container on their private property. And so allowing storage containers to be placed on the street would respond to these residents' requests. The city's municipal code states that containers may not be placed in the right-of-way for more than 1 hour at a time. Additionally, containers are not expressly allowed with an encroachment permit, and this means that city staff cannot issue a permit to allow storage containers on the street. In the 2020-2021 comprehensive fee schedule currently groups dumpsters and temporary storage containers together, and that permit costs $381 with a $500 deposit. Although this fee does not currently apply to storage containers, since the municipal code does not allow permits to be issued for storage containers. To respond to the increased demand for storage containers on the street, staff conducted an analysis on how other cities permit storage containers in the right-of-way. Staff researched how much a permit costs in other cities, inside and outside of California. What you see here are the fees charged by other cities that charge a flat fee. And the average permit fee among these cities was $198. Staff also collected requirements specific to storage containers that other cities have. Conditions of approval are requirements placed on a permit to ensure that the proposed storage container's location is safe and won't obstruct site visibility. And these requirements include where a container may or may not be placed, how many or how long a container is allowed in the right of way, and a maximum container size that can be placed on the street. More information about requirements is found on the staff report. Staff reviewed other cities' application process for applying for a permit to place a storage container on the street. And like San Mateo, many cities require a site plan to be submitted. A site plan is a detailed diagram showing the dimensions of the proposed storage container location. We found that some cities do allow a sketch drawing or a map markup to be submitted in place of a site plan, and this simplifies the permitting process for residents who may not be familiar with the encroachment permit process. And what you see here is an example from the city of Seattle, who provides this diagram to their residents, who then outline the storage container's location, provide the dimensions of the container, note any nearby driveways, and then label the cross streets. And so they would submit this in place of a site plan. Based on the information gathered from other cities, staff recommend the following to permit containers in the right of way. First, staff recommend creating a new fee for temporary storage containers that is separate from dumpsters. And the proposed fee is $181 plus a $350 deposit. $181 covers the amount of staff time needed to process an application for a storage container. And $350 is roughly twice the proposed permit fee and encourages the permittee to close out the permit and also to move the container after the 5 days allowed. The deposit would not be used as a punitive measure to enforce the 5-day limit. And staff have discussed this internally, whether to include a deposit or not, and we do welcome your feedback on the deposit following the presentation. Staff also recommend expanding the requirements for a container to include that the container be adjacent to the curb, be 8 feet or less in width, and have reflectors at each corner. For placement, the city's preference is to have the container on private property first to ensure the safety of other street users. For containers that cannot be placed on private property, staff recommend that the container be placed on street in front of the permittee's resident first. And then if that space is insufficient or causes an obstruction, then the container may be placed at the next closest on-street space, and the permittee would be required to notify the property owners or tenants nearest to the container's location. Staff also recommend adding requirements for where a container may not be placed, and that includes in front of accessible curb ramps, fire hydrants, in a manner that restricts access to utility boxes or holes, and where the container adversely affects public peace and safety. Staff recommend allowing a basic sketch or map markup to be submitted in place of a site plan, and this would help streamline the process for residents who may not be familiar with the encroachment permit process. On that sketch or map markup, the permittee would show the proposed storage container location, their residence, nearby driveways, proximity to street corners, and container dimensions. And if any are nearby, they would also show fire hydrants, accessible curb ramps, bus stops, and colored curb markings. Lastly, staff recommends updating the municipal code to expressly allow temporary storage containers in the public right-of-way with an encroachment permit for a maximum of 5 days. And this would allow staff to issue an encroachment permit to allow a storage container to be in the right-of-way. Following tonight's presentation, staff will incorporate feedback from the commission and public comment and present an ordinance to amend the municipal code and a resolution to modify the fee schedule at a later city council date. Thank you. That concludes staff presentation. We welcome your feedback on any of staff's recommendations and are available to answer any questions.
Sure. Okay, great, Nicolette. Let's open up with questions from the commission. Commissioner Robbins.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the presentation. The length of time for a permit, I had trouble finding it in the materials, but I just heard you say 5 days?
Yes, it's currently 5 days.
Is that what other cities offer? That seems very short to me.
It's within that range. It depends. Most of them had up to a week, and very few had more time. Some cities do allow residents to apply again to extend the time. Yes.
Okay, and are we proposing that there be an extension possibility or not?
We are not at this time, but if that's what the commission would like, we can look into that.
Okay, and then what, if any, enforcement do we have? Because that's, on one hand, I think 5 days is not going to be enough probably for most people, but on the other, you don't want these things sitting out there blocking traffic for weeks on end. So is there any enforcement mechanism, or are you just asking for our feedback on that?
We are limited in our resources to enforce the 5-day limit, and that's where staff came up with the deposit amount. Yes.
But then maybe I misunderstood. Is the deposit subject to forfeit if they don't remove the thing and after the 5 days? You
yes,
indicated it wasn't.
Yes. So yes. So if staff have knowledge that the container was placed in the street for an extended period of time, then the deposit would not be refunded.
Okay, so it is possible. Great. I don't have any further questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Reyes.
Thank you. I do have a couple questions. So the images, Nicolette, that you showed were of what looked like a 20-foot container. Would this also apply to much smaller ones, right? Because there are smaller moving containers that are also frequently used. Is that accurate?
Yes. So that's why we recommended expanding the requirements to have a maximum container size of 8 feet in width. We're more concerned that on narrow streets, if the container is too wide, then it'll affect site visibility and
yes.
Cars.
And that was where I was going next. So what's our comfort level that this is going to work in some of our narrow streets? And I was thinking, North Central is one example where we have quite a few narrow streets and also multifamily buildings there. Can you speak to that and how that was assessed?
Yeah, I think for streets that are more narrow, staff will have to look more closely at the size of the container that's going to be placed there. And if it comes to a point where it can't be placed on that street, I think staff would allow it in a different location. Hopefully that's closer. But again, it's the priority is the safety of the street users. And so if that is not possible, then we would not approve a permit to place that storage container on that street.
So does that mean that guidelines for residents will be published laying out, what to expect in permitting, like, such and such a street with this width, it's likely that a container of this size would be okay, sort of thing. So they don't have, they can get that information up front as opposed to dealing with the back and forth of a permitting process.
Yes, so the permit that we issue is the encroachment permit, and there's a whole encroachment permit packet that lists the conditions of approval requirements in it. And so once you are issued a encroachment permit, it is expected that you follow those guidelines. And so the requirement that the container be 8 feet or less, 8 feet in width or less, and also the requirement that the container does not affect public peace and safety are two of the requirements that would help placement of the container.
Mm-hmm. But I'm a little confused here. So the 8 feet, I'm hearing that 8 feet is the maximum size, but there's also still an assessment about whether or not that's too big for the street. Is that accurate?
Talking about, well, I'm talking about the width because we're more concerned with how it encroaches into the middle of the street.
Yeah, sorry, that's what I mean. Mm-hmm. So are there streets that are going to be too narrow for an 8-foot container? That's really my question.
Yes, I would say yes, and definitely on streets that we want to make it clear that if a fire or emergency vehicle needs to access that street and a container would obstruct that, we would not approve a permit to place the container there.
And will the information that's provided residents be clear on that, or is that something that is going to be determined after the fact? So in other words, will there be clear upfront guidance for residents who are trying to make decisions?
We would like to be as clear as possible. There are lots of residents that have contacted us through email and phone already, and I think actually making a web page to have these requirements up front and how to apply would be clear.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is all a good thing. This all totally makes sense to me. I think it's going to be quite important to provide as much clarity, concisely, but as much clarity as possible, so that someone who's trying to figure out, what they need to do to move, doesn't need to go through a, multi-day or multi-week process with the city to say can or I cannot, put a certain type of container on my street, because that could be quite stressful for residents. So, thank you for that. With regards to the site plan or sketch or map, I'm sorry you mentioned this, but will the city be accepting sketches or markups on maps?
So the example I showed was a diagram that the City of Seattle already provides to its residents. We wouldn't have that. We can provide a diagram to our residents, but residents would be free to sketch the drawing on a Google map or on a piece of paper, whatever suits them.
Okay. Okay, I have no further questions. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Nunez.
Thanks, Nicolette. Can you just speak to how we landed on the $350 deposit? Just knowing that our neighborhood cities don't ask for those deposit fees.
Yeah, I didn't show the deposit fees from other cities there. We did find a few that do have a deposit, but we've tried to figure out a baseline for a deposit, and $350 was roughly twice the amount of our proposed permit fee of $181. And we do expect to refund the deposit, if all the requirements are met by the permittee and they close out the permit and move the container within the allotted amount of time.
Okay. And my last question is, in your analysis, did you come across the average time that people have the temporary storage containers on their property? Because I echo Commissioner Robbins' concern that it's not 5 days is not enough time.
We did not. From the inquiries I've received, most of them are within a week's time. And other cities, in researching other cities, I'd say the most amount of time, or the average amount of time, was about 7 days.
If I could add on to this, the purpose of allowing these containers on street via permit is not for, it's not for the situations where somebody's doing a renovation and they're having all of their household goods on street for up to a year or so. And this is purely for moving. So the storage container is delivered, the movers or the residents are packing the belongings, and then it's gone. So it is a very short-term thing in nature. And I also want to mention that having the storage containers on street, as this permit would allow, is secondary to the city's preference, which is having them on private property. This is for residents who don't have access to off-street private options such as a driveway, and provides an opportunity for them to utilize these containers that doesn't exist right now. I know that driving around the city, we see these on street, but they're not actually permitted to be there. So this is something that allows residents to have expanded access to moving options in cases where they might not right now.
Right.
Got it. Thanks so much for the clarification. I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Lorraine.
Thank you. Regarding the deposit amount, is doubling the amount of the permit fee itself as a deposit something that the city does for other permits?
I'm going to defer that question to Sue Ellen.
I think that there's no one way that deposits are determined for any program or permit that the city does. So I can't say yes, it's typically doubled. What we were trying to do was determine an amount that would encourage the resident to come in and close the permit, but not something that would be cost prohibitive during a time when there are a lot of costs because there are costs with moving. So we were trying to strike a balance, and having it be approximately twice the cost of the permit seemed to hit those points.
Thank you. The staff report mentions getting some feedback and requests from the public to look into this. Was some kind of outreach survey conducted to get a sense of what exactly residents were looking for, with particular interest in some of what's been discussed already, such as length of time, maximum size, acceptable costs, etc.?
No, we did not do outreach for this project yet.
Yet? So is it something that may occur later?
We can.
Commissioner Lorraine, again, this is Public Works Director Underwood trying to get on screen here. But this was just kind of a need that we saw that occurs. We're not allowed to do now, right? So, and again, kind of echoing Sue Ellen's point, is that it's not intended for people to be able to just store things out there. It's kind of intended just to facilitate a move for individuals. So we felt there wasn't really a huge need. I think the research we did with other cities was adequate from our perspective. And so and again, there's probably, in somewhat, how do you do outreach on that? And you're going to get a lot of varying opinions, and it may not meet what we had intended on this project as well.
This is Chair, if I may make one follow on that particular item. It might be worth just, touching base with some moving companies. U-Haul has these containers, for example, and they probably say, oh yeah, they're normally taken out for about, X amount of time. And then we ship them. There's probably some fairly conventional timeframes that they operate under. I'm speculating, but it might be worth just touching base with a couple of moving companies and saying what's typical.
Sure, that's possible to do. Sure, we could make that effort.
Commissioner Lorraine, any further questions?
I was a little curious about whether we whether Public Works had a history with deposits involved in other encroachment permits, and just on a high level, I get the sense from the staff report that they were not often collected or held. Is that essentially the case for other encroachment permits, or was there any other information there that could be useful?
I can't say if that's the case for other permits that we issue. I know for this permit, storage container permit in particular, we were debating internally about the deposit. Yes.
I guess I was thinking of dumpsters, right? Because do we have a deposit for encroachment permits related to dumpsters at this time?
We do. That was the $381 for the permit and then $500 deposit.
Right. Okay. So I guess I was referring to that primarily. Has the city had to withhold them or have any actions taken? Is there? I presume that information informed this decision. I guess I was just maybe hoping for like a reminder or a little bit of elaboration on what history the city has had with the deposit for the dumpsters.
Commissioner Lorraine, are you asking if individuals come back and request a deposit back, or?
No, whether we've had an issue with people not moving their dumpsters and us needing to ask them, like, forfeit the deposit.
I don't believe we had issues with that. I think the intent of the deposit is just to incentivize folks to come in and close out the permit, so that we can kind of close our end of the books as well. Otherwise, that just sits out there. We have the same kind of situation with encroachment permits where they kind of drag on and on and on for work that's done in the right of way. So that's really kind of the intent of the deposits. I mean, we could take action and remove the dumpster or remove the pod, but we definitely don't want to get into that side of the business if at all possible. So I haven't seen issues such as you bring up.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay, great. I've got a few. First off, I do like this policy, at least the starts of it. I'm going to have some comments and some questions on some of the technicalities. Reason being is we had one of these storage containers. And by the way, when you rent a storage container, the rental period is 30 days. However, it does not take 30 days to move. This is really, as Sue Ellen and Brad said, this is really intended to help people who don't have the space to move their belongings into a portable storage unit. And what happens is, even if you get done with it prior to your 30 days, and like I said, they're rented out in 30-day periods. I know that because we have one that's going to be coming in about 3 weeks onto our driveway. So it is 30 days. We will only need it for a week, and then after that, it's going to be picked up. And we pay regardless whether we use it for a week or 30 days. So just to put that out there, and that's with all U-Haul, Rat Pack, pods, and all that bit. But I like this policy because I have seen storage units on the public right-of-way and have sat there for months, and that's not right. That's not the intent. So some of the questions I have, I like the 5 days. Though I think looking at if somebody comes in and needs an extension for another 5 days, that could possibly make sense. I like the deposit to incentivize people and in fact, I would even consider raising it personally to make it clear to people that, as Brad said, you don't want to get into the business of removing these things. You would rather have people come in and take them and move on because it's really only intended for moving. Though I did see, and here's a question I have in the documents that were sent to us, it makes note of if a storage unit cannot be placed in front of the resident who is moving, that it could be placed possibly next to an adjacent resident or somewhere else, and thereby impacting those individuals. Is that true?
Yes, that is true. We also wanted, we didn't want any surprises to those neighbors. So we did also, if the container is placed not in front of the permittee's residence, then the permittee would have to notify the property owner or tenant nearest to the container's location that the container would be placed in front of their property.
So that would be the responsibility of the individual. And how would you ensure that that happens?
Don't think we've thought about that yet.
Yeah. And just put that in your calculus. You know, look, if I came home one day and I found a storage unit in front of my house and nobody notified me, you know, and that was going to be one of my questions, is how far in advance is that third party notified of this storage unit, this portable storage unit? It's now going to sit in front of their house for at least 5 days, if not more. And maybe that's something the city has to do. I also saw in the meeting documents, that is, would there be some sort of notification? When I say notification, signage that states when this, you know, that is, when this unit is to be picked up. Once again, going back to the 5 days, it's dropped off on April 1, 2021, and it's picked up on April 6, 2021. And if and a number for someone to call if it's there after April 6th.
That is not part of our recommendations tonight. However, there were other cities that do require signage and a contact number to be placed on the container.
I think that would be I think that would help with enforcement. Because my concern is that, once again, this is just being done for moving. Most people can move their goods in 5 days. If they need an extension, I think I could say I would be open to that, but they'd have to go back to the city for an extension, and possibly only one extension. But people, you know, look, you know, this is impeding the street. It could impede a third party. All of a sudden, there's a storage unit in front of their home that they were not privy to or not part of. So I would encourage that the city does the notification and not leave it up to the mover. I would also state that, and these are some comments, but that there is signage on who someone can call if it's there longer than what is supposed to be there. So you've answered some of those questions. These would not be placed on any commercial. Once again, I'm going to go back to our businesses, being a business on 39th, 25th, 37th, or downtown. These units would not be placed in commercial areas.
No, they would be not. No, they would not be.
Okay, all right. So and once again, parking is a premium, and keeping parking accessible to people to visit our businesses. But I think my biggest issue, I thought the deposit was a little light, but I'll make a comment on that later. But you heard some of my comments about the third party who may be affected and signage. Let me just see if I'm missing any other questions I have here. Yeah, position, dates it's supposed to be on the street. Okay, that's all the questions I have now. Let's head out to the public. Cookie, we have any hands raised? Anybody would like to speak?
I see a hand raised by Drew.
Okay, Drew, you know the drill. 1 minute and 30 seconds. I'll chime in.
Good evening again. So I appreciate, like in this study, that part of the analysis, you looked at cities in the Bay Area, in California, and even outside of California. I just appreciate getting that baseline in a broad context, both locally and as you expand it out. I think that's a great job there. I learned some things tonight about, I always thought that deposits in part were to do damage for the pavement. If those containers go on the road and they damage it, you forfeit your deposit because there's a cost to the city to repair it. But maybe that's not the case. And I also assumed that in these kind of things that the code enforcement people can get involved to enforce it, so to speak. I mean, they're not going to get a tow truck to move it away, but they can be called and they would come out and you're violating code and some notice, but maybe that's not the case. The other thing got talked a little bit about how long. My impression with a neighbor who did this and stuff, and just talking through that the pickup window can be challenging, that the pickups, you might be ready to go, but you have to schedule a pickup and you can get well, we're not going to pick it up for 3 days or something. I don't have firsthand experience on that. But for the fee, it's just kind of my personal thing is just round that up to either round down to 180 or round it up to 190 or use 185 or do even 200. It's just Apple saying the phones are $599. No, the phones are $600. It's just rounded up to a whole 0 or a 5 or something like that if you're allowed to. And then you talk about curbs. What I wonder about this is some neighborhoods have rolled curbs, and I don't know if there's any neighborhoods in San Mateo, the city, that don't have any curbs. So potentially clarity around how that would impact things, for usability from just someone's how do I do it? And then the other thing was possibly, and this may be, I think this could even be in commercial areas because there's mixed residents above it, is how many parking spots is this going to take out, metered parking spot or time zone parking spots? I mean, in a residential neighborhood, that's not apropos, but there's plenty of areas downtown on streets that there's residents that if they needed to move, they would need it in a metered parking spot type of scenario. Okay.
30 seconds, Drew.
Hopefully I didn't forget anything. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Cookie, any other speakers for this evening on this or for this agenda item?
No, I see no other hands raised. Thank you.
Okay, great. Then let's pull it back to the commission. And thank you, Drew, once again for your comments. For a final question or two and your comments to staff, and then we'll take a motion and look at looking at a roll to vote, voting to vote. Commissioner Robbins? Final questions?
No more questions. I'm intrigued by this, and I think there is probably more work to be done in terms of the timing, whether there's possibly an extension, forfeit the deposit, et cetera, But I also think that the staff's done a lot of work here, and after comments, I plan to move that we adopt the new fees. That's really the key here. There is no fee structure for this, with the hope that staff takes that to the council and at some point in the future can look into different timing extensions, some of the other issues the commissioners have raised. That's it.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Reyes?
Yeah. So thinking a little bit more about this, one other consideration we haven't discussed is what sort of impact, if any, this might have on low-income community. For many people, $520 or whatever it is manageable. But for the low-income community, that's a lot of money. And the unfortunate reality is that the pandemic has had an enormous impact on many members, low-income members of the community. My suspicion is that there's not a lot of use of containers in that segment. but I'm wondering if that's something if that has been explored, and they're more likely to be in apartments in more narrow streets, and this may be an issue. I'm curious if that has been something that's been explored, because if they are using containers, then I'm concerned that the costs may be a problem.
Okay. Commissioner Nunez? Oh, sorry. Do you have any more comments, or?
No, that's a question for staff.
Okay.
So what do we know about who's using the containers and whether containers are or not used in the low-income community, and is this cost going to become an issue?
That is information we haven't looked into yet, but we can look into that and get back.
We do have an income waiver option for the residential on-street accessible parking application that we implemented a year or two ago. If commission so chooses, we can look into a similar waiver. But as Nicolette mentioned, we receive a lot of requests for these, but we haven't tracked any sort of demographic information when receiving those requests.
Sure, and I'm sensitive that all of these layers also create additional administrative overhead, but nevertheless, there are a lot of people moving right now, and people in that income segment in particular are dramatically impacted right now. And so, if we have any way of assessing this question, I would feel more comfortable with this, because again, $500+ is a lot of money for that segment of the community.
Commissioner Nunez?
Thank you. I have to agree with Commissioner Reyes, just because my initial question was about the deposit, and I think having an income waiver for the deposit would also make me feel more comfortable in moving forward with this. I do think this is extremely timely if we're receiving an increased requests for this, and the fact that this is kind of being nimble and flexible and providing an option for something that isn't available right now. I think agreeing with Commissioner Robbins that we need to move forward with this now, but also kind of balancing some of these comments that we're thinking through right now. I'm curious as to whether are there guidelines for whether the container is placed on adjacent properties. So, for example, not being placed in front of a driveway or sidewalk. Are we providing guidelines to folks that choose to have a storage container?
Yes, so it would be in the order I presented. So if they do have private property available, then we would not allow the container to be placed on the street. And then if the private property is not available, then the container must first be placed in the space that's right in front of the residence. But then if that space is insufficient or obstructs site visibility, then we would allow the container to be placed at the next closest on-street space that fits the container.
Okay, I would suggest maybe requiring agreement from the adjacent property owner, whether that's in writing or just some sort of acknowledgement that there's an agreement that that they know, or that they were made aware of the storage container that it would be on their property. And then, of course, just agreeing with touching base with moving companies to get a better sense of the time frame. I think by increasing, for example, to 7 days rather than 5, we would allow for moves to take 2 weekends instead of 1, and it also accommodates for people's work schedules. So those are my comments, and thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Lorraine?
Thank you. I'd like to start by just noting that while I may ask a number of questions of staff and presenters, not all of them necessarily have to or should be taken as implications of unmet needs necessarily. I'll do my best to make it clear when they are in my comments, but in this particular example, when I asked about a feedback or a survey or something to this effect for this, I'm just going to say now I don't necessarily feel that staff needed to do that or that they need to do that for this item. I think I'm asking questions such as that sometimes really just because I'm curious as a student of city policy, how everything works and when certain situations call for things and when they may not, and what sort of parameters help clue me into what makes the most sense at each opportunity. So just with that said, I would generally agree and be in support of what's been presented by staff today. I would agree that a sketch with measurements should be sufficient to meet the site plan needs rather than something more official. So I appreciate that. I would say that I am amenable to considering a renewal or extension process, as has been noted by multiple commissioners. I would agree with Chair Rowinski noting that a one-time renewal sounds appropriate given the current length being discussed. So not necessarily renewal ad infinitum, but the ability to potentially extend it a little bit farther than what's being discussed today sounds good. I would agree with other commissioners who have brought up some concern on the cost considerations as well, particularly because in these times, as has been noted, those who are moving are likely not doing very well. And I think, too, that the amount sounds a bit high just from my personal perspective. And if it hadn't been derived from a particular standard or figure that if council or others were to recommend a lower deposit, such as maybe twice the amount as opposed to instead of 3 times, I would not protest, and that may indeed be acceptable and appropriate as well. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have one question, then I'll go into my final comments. Why wasn't code enforcement? Wouldn't code enforcement be involved if a portable storage unit exceeds its allowed time? Is that not typical to have code enforcement involved in something like this? And that, Nicolette?
I know currently code enforcement does, as part of their responsibilities, if they do see a storage container, currently they do enforce it. We hadn't reached out to code enforcement for this project. Yes, Sue Ellen, would you like to add?
Yeah. Typically right now for encroachment permits that are issued, public works inspectors go out to the field to do inspection. With workload and with staffing, we would not be able to proactively have staff go out there every 5 days or something of that nature.
Right.
But they would be able, if there were complaints, we do have staff within public works available that currently enforce on or look into encroachment permit issues.
Right. And thus, I think that, and I understand that, and thus that really supports my suggestion. One of my suggestions to you, now I'm going to wrap up on my final comments, is you have to have signage on there, on that storage unit, how long it's going to, how long it's supposed to be there, drops off April 1, picked up April 6th, or whatever that is. And a number of people can call if it's there longer. It's happened, I've seen it. And that's my, and I like this policy a lot. I think we need it. But the aspect of having these units are really there to facilitate moving and people who don't have private space. And I get that. But my concern is, I think the deposit is needed. It's an incentive. However, we can use the income waiver. I would like to have code enforcement involved. That is, if somebody calls up, once again, on the side of this storage unit, there's all the information, how long it's supposed to be there and who to call if it's beyond that date. Because these are not intended to be long-term storage units. They're there for a very short period of time to help people move. I would begin to understand, what about damage to the street? If one of these are stored on the street, who's responsible for that? Nobody. The city just picks it up. That's also something else I think that needs to be looked at. So big picture, my comments are 5 days is fine. I would have a process for an extension, a one-time extension. The third-party notification, Commissioner Nunez talked about an agreement, something, so they are notified well in advance that they might be losing their parking space for anywhere from 5 to 10 days, whatever that is, in front of their unit or their home. Signage that tells how long this is supposed to be, when it's delivered, when it's supposed to be picked up, and who to call if it's still there. Damage to curbs. Those are some of my comments. I mean, what I would like to do, I think this is a first cut and it's needed, but I would like to possibly have this come back to the commission with some, you're getting feedback from us, with an update of where this policy is.
So Chair Rowinski, this is Brad.
Sure.
Yeah, a couple of comments from me. I have heard a lot of concerns and questions, and seems like some requests for more research or information from the commissioners tonight, that I think it's probably best that we do bring it back at a future date here, with answering some of those questions. I will say that the two things. One, this is in the public right of way, so it wouldn't be code enforcement that would do that. It would be our own inspectors. So, and then you said it correctly. It's kind of a last resort for folks, right? We want to have them put it on their own property if at all possible. So it's kind of last resort. And then the last thing I want to say is that since this is public right of way, we don't necessarily have to have an agreement with a neighbor that this is going to be in front of. Obviously, we want to discourage that as well. I think just a notification, courtesy notification would be fine. But going and requiring people to sign things, I think would be a bit much, especially when this again is public right away. No one owns the parking spot out in front of their house. So those are my comments, and I don't necessarily disagree that while we want to get this in place as soon as possible, I just heard a lot of questions and so forth that I think it probably could be vetted out a little bit better and brought back to you.
Could we bring it back next month at the November meeting? Yeah, the November meeting. Or is that too? And the only reason I propose the November meeting, I'll be curious. This is timely, and I think it's a very good idea to help people move.
Yeah, let me see what we have going on next month already.
Yeah. And it is important. I don't want to underestimate. And like I said, I can speak for myself. I like the policy.
I guess that would be probably our preference and our goal to do. I just don't know if staff can get everything done by then. So that will be the only challenges. Yeah, but I think we can say that we'll make every effort to bring it back and to the November meeting.
Sure.
Through the chair, if I could make one additional comment.
Please.
You you had noted, you had mentioned a question about damage to the street, and I heard that a few other times. There is an insurance requirement as part of the permit process. And we've discussed how that insurance is met by the renter or by the homeowner. And they're able to add the temporary storage containers to their renter's insurance or the homeowner's insurance. So that insurance requirement is what would cover damage to the street. It's not meant to be the deposit covering that. And that is already part of what we're bringing forward. So I just wanted to make that note so that you're aware.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, and most people have some form of homeowners insurance. I don't know how many folks have renters insurance. What I hear you saying, if they didn't have it, would they be issued the permit? I don't know that.
I believe they would have to show proof of insurance prior to permit issuance, but I think that Nicolette could speak to that in terms of the application process.
Yes, for any encroachment permit issued, we do have to receive a certificate of insurance.
Sure. Okay. All right. So what I'm kind of hearing is we can tackle this one next month with taking in some of our suggestions and then hopefully get it out to City Council. Do we need to take a vote on that on the commission? I'm not quite sure how this works at this point.
No, I don't think there's a required vote for that. That's just direction you're providing us, and we're in agreement with that.
Okay.
If the staff doesn't ask for it at this point, so you're withdrawing the request, and then one of the commissioners doesn't make a motion, and I don't plan to now, then we don't have to take any action at this point.
Okay, thank you, Cliff. All right, are the commissioners in agreement? We'll pick this up in November. Okay, all right.
It's fine.
All right, all right. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to our last agenda item here. And once again, thank you, Nicolette, for your time. You're now free. And we hope that our input as the commission, as well as the public, Drew's input, is all helpful in crafting what is actually a very important policy. And I commend staff for presenting that to us. So our third and final agenda item tonight under new business is the disposable food service ware policy. And the objectives of this item is for the public and the commission to receive an update and to provide update from staff and provide staff with feedback. And because this item requires a recommendation from the commission to City Council, a roll call vote may be taken at the end of this agenda item. Our presentation tonight will be made by Andrea Chow, Sustainability Analyst for the city. And once again, following Andrea's presentation, we'll open up with questions from the commission, and then we'll reach out to the public. So on that note, Andrea, please.
Great. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Andrea Chow. I'm the Sustainability Analyst for the City of San Mateo. And tonight, my presentation will cover disposable food serviceware policy options. So in the past, the County of San Mateo has led regional efforts to address waste and litter from restaurants. The county led the development of the styrofoam ban ordinance, as well as the reusable bag ordinance. And both of these ordinances were eventually adopted by all the cities in the county. These efforts helped combat negative environmental impacts, since styrofoam and plastic bags often ended up as litter in our streets, which ultimately polluted our waterways. Unfortunately, now instead of styrofoam, plastic is now typically used in food facilities and has become that pervasive pollutant. So while disposables are very, very convenient to customers, plastic disposables have lasting impacts on the environment. Plastic disposables are often used for just a few minutes, before becoming waste that takes hundreds, if not thousands of years to break down. Recycling is a very complex process, and unfortunately, many plastic disposables are not recycled due to contamination. I think over the past year, we heard how the plastic recycling market has changed in China and other Asian countries. And so there's now a drastic change in what types of plastics will be accepted. And so plastics end up piling up in waste facilities and landfills, and sometimes are even being incinerated. Earlier this year in February, the County of San Mateo adopted a disposable food serviceware ordinance that addresses this environmental and pollution challenge. The council prioritized exploring the county's ordinance this fiscal year. And an ordinance like this might also help the city achieve 100% trash reduction, a requirement of the municipal regional stormwater permit, which is another council priority. These images illustrate the pollution problem with disposables coming from restaurants and food trucks and food facilities. 80% of ocean pollution is from land-based sources. So the statistics really shows how our actions have serious impacts on our bay and on our ocean. The Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute last year in 2019 found microplastics all the way down on the ocean floor. The study also found that these microplastics were likely from food and beverage packaging. The study also found that small ocean animals are consuming microplastics, which introduces these particles into the food web. So we know that plastic is a challenging issue. In crafting the disposable food serviceware ordinance, the County of San Mateo put together a policy matrix, and this was attached to the staff report as attachment 1. I put together this slide to kind of show the main difference between the policy approaches, and that was jurisdictions either regulate all of the disposable types or focus on smaller accessories. And when I say small accessories, I'm referring to utensils, spoons, knives, forks, etc., straws, stirrers, and lid plugs or spill plugs. The policy analysis also showed another distinction, and that's between the types of disposables used. All of the jurisdictions had set out to ban typical plastic as the regulated item. But there was definitely some variation in which jurisdictions allowed compostable plastic and which did not. So this slide shows typical plastic on the left, and then in the center, what we've seen grow in popularity is compostable plastics made of bioplastics or polylactic acid, PLA. And then finally on the very right, this is the term the county has used in their ordinance, non-plastic and compostable products. For them, it's defined as fiber-based materials such as paper, sugarcane, bamboo, and wood. And so these are 3 separate categories. I'm going to review the 3 policy options that we identified in addressing disposables, starting with the county's disposable food serviceware ordinance, which addresses all types of disposable items, small accessories regulations, which focus on straws and utensils and these smaller items, and then upon request regulations, which this policy approach really focuses on shifting the restaurant's behavior so that certain items are only given upon request to the customer. So the county's ordinance impacts all food facilities, and this is defined as entities that have a valid health permit for distributing food and beverages to the public. This means restaurants, mobile food trucks that operate within the jurisdiction, farmers markets, and private schools. So as I had said, their ordinance covers all types of disposables. So this means everything that's shown in this picture, all containers, cups, lids, utensils, and straws. Their requirement is that all of these products be non-plastic and compostable. And that's why I really showed that other slide explaining the different types of materials, because while some jurisdictions allow for compostable plastic, the county's ordinance does not. So there's really an emphasis on fiber-based, non-plastic compostable products here. There is some nuance and there are some exceptions. So I will bring up that they do allow products that are aligned with compostable plastic, and these items must be certified by the third party called the Biodegradable Products Institute, BPI. The county anticipated this allowance because hot items are likely to be best served with perhaps with this lining. The ordinance also has a upon request aspect. They require that small accessories such as straws, utensils, condiment packets be provided only upon request or at a self-serve area. So when the county adopted this ordinance in February of this year, it applied to unincorporated areas of the county. Following the county's ordinance adoption, several cities also followed suit. So that includes South San Francisco, Burlingame, and Atherton, and then just very recently, Half Moon Bay. The county provides education and enforcement in cities that adopt the county's ordinance, which alleviates the time required for a city to implement their own ordinance. When I wrote the staff report, the county's ordinance was scheduled to begin enforcement 1 year after the adoption, which was March 2021. The point of having a delayed enforcement allows time for the county to educate and inform all food facilities of the new requirements. And then it also allows the restaurants to use up their existing inventories of disposables that might not meet the requirement. So this transition time is very important. Due to COVID-19, the county just announced that they will officially postpone enforcement of their ordinance, and they're planning for enforcement March of 2022. So they are delaying enforcement a full year from which they had scheduled it. Okay, so small accessory regulations, again, refers to these smaller items such as straws and utensils. Instead of addressing all disposable food serviceware, there are quite a few cities that opt for regulations just focusing on smaller accessories and requiring that these items be compostable. Example cities include the city of Pacifica, Palo Alto, Malibu, and Santa Barbara. And upon request regulations, so as of January of 2019, AB 1884 actually requires that all restaurants in California only provide plastic single-use straws upon request. And so this idea of upon request is that you're not giving extra items to your customers when they might not need it. So the cities of Palo Alto, Malibu, and Santa Barbara also included this type of policy language that requires restaurants to change their behavior and really only provide these items when the customer requests it. And so upon request regulations could apply to things like condiment packets and napkins. And this is a policy that could be adopted standalone, or something like the cities I just mentioned could be coupled with the small accessories regulations as well. So the city of San Mateo has 428 food facilities that could potentially be impacted by a policy. An effort to get a sense of the barriers and challenges with the county's ordinance approach, staff conducted some preliminary research with an online survey. The survey was open for 28 days, but only 13 food facilities responded. And then in addition to that, staff conducted some direct outreach via telephone calls and email, and was able to have conversations with 10 food facilities. So this is a pretty limited sample size, but it helps provide some preliminary findings about what the challenges might be in meeting these proposed requirements. And I think certainly if the city were to pursue policy adoption, there would be more robust outreach and education needed. But I want to share a few of my findings. One is that businesses use a variety of disposables. So I didn't identify any of the 23 businesses that used all non-plastic compostable, but most of the restaurants reported using some type of compostable product. I think maybe this is common sense, but I wanted to share that depending on the type of businesses, the restaurant might use just a few types of disposables, while others use every single type of disposable container. And then overall, the sense I got was that businesses understood the intent of a policy and what it meant to go green, but they did identify a few major challenges. And then I've spoken to this a couple of times, but I do want to share it was very challenging to distinguish between plastic compostable and non-plastic compostable versus plastic compostable because I think compostable plastic has become very common. It often, I mean, you would recognize it. It's in those photos and it says biodegradable on it. But I bring it up again because the county's ordinance does not allow for compostable plastic. And I'll highlight too why the county made this decision. It's often because compostable plastic is missorted and placed into the recycling bin. And then on top of that, in order to reduce the impact of potential pollution, the idea is fiber-based compostables would pose less of a threat than compostable plastic to the marine environment. So there was some thinking that went into that decision. Okay, now getting into the challenges. Overwhelmingly, food facilities identified their primary concern with cost. It came up time and time again, even in food facilities that supported the ordinance, they were still concerned about the cost impact. And so a cost assessment prepared by the county, which was one of the attachments to the report, does show that non-plastic compostable products tend to be more expensive. It's hard to estimate the exact impact to restaurants because it really depends on how and what they use currently. But the majority of businesses that were concerned with the ordinance identified that any cost increase to buy new products could be very impactful to their business. Another concern was quality and durability of the compostable alternatives. Several restaurants pointed out that compostables were not even an option for certain hot food items, and they were just wary of getting negative feedback from customers if items leaked. And this came up a few times from businesses, was about the availability of compostable products from their vendors. So I think we all know and recognize how the pandemic has had significant financial impacts to businesses. At the onset of the pandemic, restaurants saw a sharp decline in customers, great loss in revenues. While some food facilities can provide outdoor dining, many rely completely on takeout and delivery options for their customers, which also means they're purchasing more disposables than ever. And restaurants operate on thin margins, and so any increase in costs would likely be more impactful now than in normal circumstances. And so I think we have to be sensitive to the economic impacts and think about how businesses might be struggling beyond what we might consider the end of the pandemic. As far as environmental impact, the county's model ordinance is the most comprehensive approach that would have the greatest environmental impact. And then in addition to this, the county is offering to provide education and enforcement to support the cities that adopt this model ordinance. But a key consideration is the additional cost to restaurants to provide the compostable products and whether this is something our restaurants can absorb given the current financial challenges. Adopting a policy that regulates small accessories would have more of a limited environmental impact, less of a financial impact, hopefully, on businesses, and could possibly be a stepping stone to transition our food facilities to more compostables. And then considering the upon request policy, this is a behavior-based approach. So we really hope that this would save businesses money. And especially right now when many people are ordering takeout and delivery to eat at home, I'm sure that everyone's experienced picking up their takeout and having all the utensils in the bag already, and you're already eating at home, so you didn't need them. So again, these are three types of regulations. The last two, the small accessories regulations and the upon request regulations, are something that can be considered separately or also be combined. I think one thing to note, though, is the city would be responsible for outreach and implementation of those two approaches, because the county's support is really limited to cities that adopt the county's ordinance as a model. And that concludes my presentation for this evening. So I'm open to questions and hearing your thoughts on the different policy options.
Great. Thank you, Andrea, very much. How about Commissioner Nunez? What questions do you have?
Thanks, Chair Rowinski, and thank you, Andrea, for the presentation. Just want to make sure I'm understanding. The county has delayed its enforcement to March 2022, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so it sounds like that's plenty of time for businesses to transition and kind of absorb the impacts of the pandemic. And while there's a cost, it sounds like the rollout of this policy is being sensitive to that. And then my only other question is to confirm that the county's model ordinance also has an element of only providing at request, providing these utensils at request, correct?
It does. Yeah, so the county's ordinance is fully comprehensive of the other approaches.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so it requires compostables of all types of disposables, including small accessories, and then requires that behavior change of the upon request only.
Great, thanks. No further questions.
Sure, thank you. Commissioner Lorraine?
Thank you. Andrea, when I looked at the matrix provided by the county on other cities, regions, et cetera, that have different ordinances and whatnot on the books, and thinking through what feedback has currently been received from our local businesses on the matter of some hot foods not necessarily being well handled with the non-plastic compostables. I saw that we have a couple of cities or entities that have already implemented such policies, and I wondered if you have a sense of how those cities or areas may have dealt with that pain point.
Yeah, that's a great point. So there are other cities that have similar requirements. So the county does have a suite of support services that they're going to offer restaurants during this transition period, and one of them is creating an inventory of different compostable products that align with their ordinance. So hopefully that is one way to introduce different and new products to food facilities that right now think that it is not viable for their food facility. And then I think as there is a exemption. So if there's just no product that can meet the county's ordinance, they will offer an exemption. But they have support and staff to talk through with restaurants on and identify a product that might work for them.
Excellent. Thank you. That is my question.
Sure, thank you. Commissioner Robbins.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. Excellent work as always. Thank you. Do we know about any of the bigger cities in our county where they are in the process, if at all? Redwood City, Daly City, all props to Atherton and Burlingame, but I don't know how many restaurants are in Atherton right now. And Burlingame has some great ones, but it pales compared to us. Do we know what's going on in those bigger cities?
So I'd have to check in again with Daly City because I know they were very active before the pandemic and interested in the ordinance, but I don't know where it is now. I know the city of Millbrae was also interested, but I don't think it's gone back to their council yet. And then I should check in with Redwood City. I have not yet.
Okay, that's my only question. Thanks.
Okay, great. Commissioner Reyes?
Thank you, Andrea. I do have several questions. Personally, I'm glad we're taking a look at this. Frankly, it's alarming, the amount of trash that's being generated now, and it's really quite destructive. At the same time, as you noted, restaurants are under extraordinary pressure right now, so it's really a bad situation. Some specific questions I have is I did notice in the cost comparison, which was very informative, it was only a cost comparative against fiber products. I'm wondering if there is a similar cost comparison against bioplastic products. Has that been done?
I had not looked at that since the model ordinance is really what I was measuring against, but that is, so I'm not sure how bioplastics compare in price.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
If I recall the county discussion, because I coincidentally was at that meeting at the county supervisors when this was discussed. It's getting a little fuzzy now. One of the concerns with the bioplastics is that they are not only often sorted into the recycling bins, but they actually cause problems with the machines that process the recycling. And so that's a significant part of the problem. I feel torn and not knowledgeable enough to understand the implications, though, of going with a fiber-only approach from the standpoint of overall production industry direction and what the potentiality is with regards to cost. I mean, if the county is not implementing till 2022, that's a pretty long lead time if they need to make adjustments. And it would sure be interesting to have a sense from the industry players what the trajectory is on fiber-based versus bioplastics and what the trajectory is on costs of these products. My suspicion is that bioplastics may end up being much more flexible and costs may come down more quickly and may scale. I may be totally wrong. That's strictly an impression, but not based on actual data. And I think it might be important to do a little bit of research on that because we're talking, just on the cost data that we do have, some of these products are twice as much, right? With the natural fiber, that's a lot. That's a pretty heavy burden to potentially place on a restaurant. And we have to fix this problem, and as the product volumes grow, then the prices will come down. So that's good, but it may not be the same for bioplastics and fiber. And somebody has looked at this question, I'm sure. And so it would be really, really interesting to get a hold of some industry work to say, hey, what's the price trajectory of these respective products? And that should be something that we should look at very closely when making this decision. A couple of, on the other hand, I really like the idea of leveraging the county. If everybody's doing the same thing, it just becomes a lot easier for everybody, right? Communication becomes easier and everybody's rowing in the same direction and so forth. But, I don't think anybody here is ready to pull the lever to have a policy start tomorrow, given the economic circumstances. And I think it would be a good idea to take advantage and do a little research and see if we can create, you know, if we see an opportunity that maybe the county didn't see before, to maybe have a conversation with the county about whether it's worth revisiting that, given the long lead time here. The issue, so I'm completely in favor of moving with a comprehensive policy as soon as that's feasible. I'm intrigued by the notion of an on-request ordinance, in that I think that could be something that could be an early action. Maybe you can comment on how would that education process work, and I assume there may not be an actual enforcement process, that it's really an education process. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
There's an enormous amount of trash that's being generated just for what you said, utensils and, you know, the ketchup things and so forth. And try as we might, you know, with the restaurants, they often give it to us anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think there would be an enormous amount of enforcement. I'm sorry. I'll start with the education and outreach before a policy is implemented. I mean, it's going to be multiple medias. It's going to take direct phone calls, because I think it will be really challenging to reach all of the businesses. And then when it comes to enforcement of something like upon request, it is very challenging. I mean, something like this is usually enforced by complaints. So if a complaint comes in, then staff can follow up with the business to let them know about the policy. But it's really, it depends on a lot of communication with between the city and the businesses that it affects. Yeah, and then on the flip side of things, I'm hopeful and interested that consumers might also start indicating that they do not want these.
what the county is suggesting. That's possible. Let's see. I think what's also interesting that hasn't been brought up is, if we look at mobile food trucks, for example, or any type of mobile restaurant, these mobile restaurants have to move between cities. So if I go into Half Moon Bay, I have to have one set of utensils. If I come into San Mateo, I could possibly use a different set of utensils. It helps businesses to start to standardize on objects that they use for their work, and so I think that's also something to take into account on this. Andrea, the only question I think I really have is that the county ordinance for hot items would allow BPI plastics. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the ordinance requires the use of fiber-based compostables, except that it also allows that those compostables can be lined with compostable plastic. And so the goal of that is to provide an alternative, probably a container for hot foods that would be better suited for hot foods.
Right. Yeah. And do you know if that would then address the questions of for lack of a better term, gumming up the systems for compostable plastics? That is, these are accidentally, inadvertently placed in the recycle bin versus it must, otherwise the county probably wouldn't have allowed it.
Yeah, I believe so. And I hope that there's some pictures. There's a picture in one of the attachments too of the fiber-based container. The visual itself is very different than the bioplastic.
Right.
So I think it does make it easier to differentiate.
Okay. Okay. It sounds like I had probably more comments than questions. I'm sorry about that. I didn't realize that, but why don't we open this up for comments from the public? Cookie, do we have?
Before we do that, sorry,
sure.
I realized I didn't introduce that Roxanne is available. So did you want to pipe in now?
I did want to just my camera on here. I just wanted to say that Susan's exactly right about the bioplastics and the machinery at the recyclery, but it's more plastic bags or the thin plastics that cause the gumming up of the machines. The problem is the other materials probably will be sorted out. The clamshells and that type of plastic most likely will be sorted out. But if the plastic bag gets in the machines, that's when we really have the destruction and the major problems. Okay. So the clamshells, it's very hard to tell a clamshell if it's plastic based or what the quality of the plastic is. It's going to be pulled out. It's most likely not going to be composted. That's why we recommend the fiber based, because it will fully compost within either the within the turn cycle of the turn cycles of composting. So when it goes through the composting process, it will break down within that period of time. The bioplastics can take a lot longer to break down. But and the good news is our plastic that are being recycled currently, that are going overseas, we are getting some revenue. We've been fortunate enough that they've been pretty clean, but that's sorting out all the non-plastic that can't be recycled. And there's so many that cannot be recycled. Plastic forks, plastic spoons, none of that can be recycled, or any plastic that actually touches food, in essence, cannot be recycled. So bottles, cans, those will be plastic bottles will always be recycled, but clamshells most likely are always going to go, even if they're the bioplastic, will go into the landfill.
Right. But Roxanne, this is Susan. If a clamshell is made up of some sort of fiber based, it would then go into the compost, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It breaks down within the 6 week or the 8 week turnaround time of the compost. So it'll definitely break down. And so will the bamboo silverware or any fiber-based product will break down.
Right. Yeah. I will share this with everyone. I actually went online and I looked at Andrea, you heard me talk about this. I actually looked at the price of plastic forks and knives, and I compared them to wooden forks and knives. I went to Amazon and Walmart.com, and actually I did not see a big material difference in price. At times the wooden was less than the plastic. So
I don't mean to I guess I'm asking for your time, but I honestly think what we have to do during this period of time too is really promote reuse, where we're talking about everything being disposable. Andrea and I had a conversation of how we can at the same time possibly promote reuse all at the same time. So whenever this is introduced or we do go forward, everything doesn't have to be disposable. We can reuse things. So you can use a regular fork and knife, and they're possibly taking beyond just working with our restaurants, working with our residents to maybe sign a pledge to say, I'll bring my own, or we can somehow incentivize we don't have to necessarily just incentivize a restaurant. We need to incentivize our whole community and go back to reuse, where we have a tendency to think everything we can just toss. So the more reuse we can promote, I think the better we can somehow broach this all together.
Agree. Thank you. Cookie, do we have speakers? Cookie, let's see. I see Drew and Carol.
Okay, I have, yes, Drew.
Yes. Okay, Drew, please.
Hello again. So just some thoughts on this one. I definitely support the direction overall. I mean, from my vantage point, I think upon request is a no-brainer. I don't know that it needs an ordinance, though. It may be more education instead of this ordinance. I mean, I, for many years, I'll get stuff and like, I don't need that included in my food or whatever. And it's so I just view that as a no-brainer. But I think it's a grand goal, the full goal of this. And I think including that in on the, when I have to take something in the compost bin or the recycle bin or the solid waste bin, I mean, I think that is part of the process. So if there's a debate and it's not easy to figure that out, it's not obvious, I think that should reflect all the way back into the process, if at all possible, as far as like bioplastic. It's like, what do I do with this? My spouse and I, we've had this thing, like, does this go here? The more like the full cycle chain and the more obvious, there's value in that through the whole process. If it's kind of obvious to folks, that's can go in the compost bin. And clearly it's obvious when people are using things. So the other thing, I was somewhere maybe a year ago when this got presented, and I asked the analyst that was doing this from the county, hey, so have you ever been to the Costco Business Center? Have you been to Smart and Final? And they're like, no. And I do have a lot of passion about, we shouldn't be expecting restaurants, if they can't go to, if you've never been to the Costco Business Center that's in South San Francisco, I suggest go take a look. There's an aisle or two full of this stuff only. It's different than a regular Costco. And if they can't go buy this stuff easily at like Smart and Final, the Costco Business Center, other food services, I think there is a part that the ordinance shouldn't be forcing that until there's availability at some level to go get that stuff. And, the goal can be that's where we want to go, but there's this little bit of catch-22 on the market process and how that plays out. And I am passionate about that because the person's like, yeah, we really haven't checked the supply side. And I'm like, how can you ask people to do something and you don't have the full supply side? I mean, this goes to me with like Safeway, including black plastic in the bakery stuff that can't be recycled in the system. And it's like, why doesn't someone call up Safeway and say, please switch everything over to clear plastic? These things aren't heat sensitive. So it's like working both sides and not just, we want the businesses to go solve this. We need to partner with them and help this whole process, it's part of a bigger thing. The ordinance is just one piece. And I do think it's a little bit of catch-22.
30 seconds.
Remember electric vehicles. Oh, battery things will never work. And now electric vehicles are coming in place and stuff. So thank you all for your work on this.
Okay, thank you, Drew.
Okay, I have Carol Steinfeld.
Carol?
Hi, I'm all for this, but I didn't hear if San Mateo restaurant owners were gathered yet to discuss this. You might have touched on that. I know the owners of the 2 cafes I go to were aware of it, but said they'd comply. They wanted to know more about it. I really think there'd have to be some market transformation before doing this during the build up to the launch, the run up to the launch, whereby sources are identified and maybe even discounts arranged. That happens with water conservation and energy conservation fixtures. Also, I think that any food operation that can meet this should receive some kind of door decal or counter display, maybe even before the policy is officially enacted and started, so they get the goodwill points and marketing points, and customers understand the wider value of this. There should be a lot of publicity around it. And just a side note, since you mentioned Joe LaMariana of Rethink Waste, the waste to energy scheme he mentioned could benefit from this because this packaging, which is mostly carbon-based, would be adding carbon to that process, which is really good for making biogas. Yeah, and I do worry that hot, wet foods won't work ideally with this. However, in my youth, there were these unlined cardboard Chinese takeout cartons used for decades, seemingly with few problems.
Right.
That many of those brown fiberboard containers you get at Whole Foods and such are actually lined with plastic. And I throw some of that in my composter, and later I found little pieces of plastics. I always thought it was wax, it's plastic. But thank you. I'm glad this is moving forward in our city.
Great. Thank you, Carol. Okay, I'm going to bring this back to the commission. Brad, are we looking, according to the notes, there was a request for making a recommendation to City Council about this ordinance. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is the request. Right. I'm looking for feedback and on the different policy options. Kathy, did you want to add?
And so really it depends. I mean, so we can move this forward to City Council as a study session with the feedback from the commission, or if the commission wants to have additional information, we can bring that back to the commission before you make a recommendation to council for their study session consideration.
Right. So we could, recommendation could be a study session, recommendation could be it comes back to our commission, then back to City Council. Is that what you're saying here, Kathy? Yeah.
Yeah, it could be either or.
Yeah. And really what the questions you're asking us is, should we make a I just want to make sure everybody understands this, and I understand it. You know, should we make a recommendation to adopt a council ordinance? Is that one of the questions, or adopt a upon use request?
There are 3 different policy options that were reviewed in the presentation. So I'm looking for feedback on direction on the different options and and on next steps.
Yeah, and I
can show them again.
Just remind everybody what those options are.
Yeah, so the 3 different options are, I thought this would be easiest and fastest. Here we go. So we've got the County of San Mateo Model Ordinance, which is otherwise known as their Disposable Food Serviceware Ordinance, that addresses all types of containers and that they be fiber-based compostable, with enforcement starting March 2022. A small accessories regulation would probably something like the example cities I named, but it would address just the small accessories and require that those be compostable. So forks, spoons, straws, stirrers.
Got it.
And then upon request, regulations are really more behavior-based with restaurants, and that can be adopted as a standalone policy or also coupled with the small accessories regulations.
Okay, great. Alrighty, thank you. Then let's bring it back to the commission for a last question and final comments before we take a motion. Is what it looks like. Commissioner Nunes?
Thanks, Chair Winsky. I see this as a huge opportunity for our city, specifically to achieve our trash reduction goals, our waste reduction, stormwater compliance. I know an incredible amount of outreach and engagement has been done to draft this a flexible model ordinance that takes into account almost all, if not all, angles of this issue. And we have an opportunity here to be ahead of the curve and consistent with our neighboring jurisdictions. I'm excited about the reuse opportunity as well that was mentioned, that Roxanne mentioned. That's really where the big change is going to happen. And as consumers, we expect that restaurants will provide us with utensils, and when really we should be bringing our own in the first place. The county's ordinance, as mentioned in the staff report, would have the greatest environmental impact. And while this would likely increase the cost for our restaurants slightly, I think that with the extended timeline of enforcement in March 2022, there will be plenty of time to address both the cost and also to figure out the supply side as well. And I'm confident that the county will look into the supply side of this if they have not already in between when Drew checked in with them and now, especially since they provided a list of they're committing to providing a menu of vendors, potential vendors, and I'm sure that they would have reached out to them in advance of that. We have an opportunity to be leaders here. We have an opportunity to be consistent with our neighboring jurisdictions, and I will certainly be recommending that our commission recommend to council to adopt the county's model ordinance.
Okay, great. Thank you. Commissioner Lorraine.
Thank you. Ditto everything Vice Chair Nunez said. I will try my best not to say any of it again in my comments here. Well, I'm sure I will touch on something here or there, but I also support joining other cities with this model ordinance as part of a county-wide effort for some of the value that has been mentioned by multiple commissioners and I believe the public as well. I think uniformity and having each city coming forward, taking a step forward with a similar step forward is important. So for that reason, in addition to the other benefits that were mentioned by Andrea with regard to county support on this is definitely a big reason why I'm in favor of this. I actually like that this ordinance moves away from compostable plastics in favor of fiber-based foodware. Some of the reasons why have been brought up already. I won't pretend to be a complete industry expert, and I'm not necessarily against doing extra research on cost comparisons, et cetera, but I think it would be hard to convince me that the cost, even if there were a significant cost difference, that it would be worth it. I agree with Citizen Drew's comment about there being value in simplicity with regard to this process. I think a lot of people get it wrong now because it's too complicated. And one of the reasons why is there are way too many kinds of plastics. And I do even frankly think there's value in putting forth a process that seeks to reduce plastics straight up for the many of the reasons that have been brought up already. I also feel like there are alternate costs that could be borne by going down a bioplastic route that surely have their own costs to the climate action plan and more, as I believe Chair Warinsky kind of referred to with regard to how these are being handled on the back end. I understand that it is a bit more costly, but I think, we have had opportunities like this before that have also involved extra costs and were worth it in the end. And I did not end up bankrupting businesses or causing huge burdens. The minimum wage increase in the city of San Mateo comes to mind, and indeed the bag ban as well. My sense is that like the bag ban, this is something that could similarly get passed on to consumers potentially without huge negative impacts, and maybe even incentivize reuse and less consumption as well, which is of course part of the idea here. So all the more reason, I think, also to get behind the county plan with outreach, because there are financial gains to be had there. And I think that might help support our businesses as they go through this process. As has been mentioned, there's a large amount of lead time as well. So that makes me feel a lot more comfortable. This is not being borne upon businesses while they're trying to figure things out and stay afloat during COVID-19. If it were, I think I would have issues with that, but it's not. So Commissioner Reyes mentioned that an interest in pursuing a upon request portion to be pursued earlier than March 2022, and I am completely in favor of that. I would agree. I in fact saw the proposal as a question of like, how far could we really go, and could we potentially, if there's an opportunity for us to go a little bit faster, a little bit farther, as Vice Chair Nunez mentioned, being a leader, I am amenable to that. I would even be interested in potentially adopting something like a small accessories language in advance, if staff and businesses both felt that it wouldn't be too obnoxious and distracting and an obstacle. I suspect that it might be seen that way, and it might in fact be too onerous and maybe not that valuable. So my guess is that the upon request is probably a good first step, and it would be awesome for us to take in advance. And I think that could even help just with the overall broad timeline we're looking at now, to serve as kind of a step for now, to give businesses and the public a sense of, hey, things are changing. We're interested in trying to reduce our overall waste and et cetera. This is step one, and it'll maybe make the second step easier to implement. So for those reasons, I am also interested in recommending to the council that we go ahead with the city model ordinance, and potentially, as Commissioner Reyes said, with some additional research by staff, if possible, doing upon request more quickly than that. Thank you.
If I may, through the chair, can I make a comment to that? I think we should be cautious in going down the path, I think, of an upon request ordinance at this time. I think just being sensitive to the staff time that takes, and also the outreach and engagement. Like, this is a huge effort, and the county is funding the outreach and engagement at no cost to cities in due time. And so going forward with an ordinance, a stopgap ordinance, may confuse businesses and consumers. And I think it's well intended, but I think it may kind of end up setting us back, and also may place undue burden on staff to come up with an outreach and engagement plan specifically to San Mateo. It takes a lot to do that. So I would really caution us in going down that path, and I really just moving forward with the county's model ordinance.
May I provide a comment here, just to expand on this idea of upon request regulations? I think what I'm hearing, and what also Roxanne had brought up, and Commissioner Reyes as well, is an upon request, more voluntary campaign might be something that meets your guys' direction while moving towards the model county ordinance. So that was not listed as one of the policy options, but would be I think a thoughtful next step.
Is there capacity to undertake that?
I think I should probably confer with my colleagues, but it kind of depends. Yeah, I guess I shouldn't commit anything too far now.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Andrew.
Well, for what it's worth, through the chair, if I may,
All right.
I thank you. I find the vice chair's comments well taken, and would be okay with potentially going with a more voluntary campaign instead of an ordinance for the reasons suggested. It might even provide an opportunity to do something like what Carol Steinfeld mentioned in public comment, which is boost those that are interested in trying things out of their own volition in the interim, but not necessarily have staff go down an expensive, costly, nomadic journey towards something before the county does it next year or something. That makes sense to me.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Commissioner Robbins. I'm sorry, yes, Commissioner Robbins?
Yes, thank you. I'm a fan of the comprehensive approach. I think going with the county model makes perfect sense. It would be a nightmare to have a patchwork across the street, city to city, particularly given how many restaurants have multiple units. I think availability and cost are actually a lot bigger issues than I'm hearing discussed here. These guys deal with restaurant supply. They don't go to Amazon or Costco generally. So I think there are some real issues there. I think they are surmountable, but I think we need more outreach and to the affected businesses. I think the environmental goal is key, but I don't think this is something we can impose on folks without a lot of pushback unless we do much more outreach / education, get the real facts and also educate these folks as to ways they can absorb these costs or get products at a more reasonable price. Lastly, I think timing is key, and I would not support anything that looks like we're going to suggest imposing this scenario on our local restaurants prior to the March 2022. And my preference would be to say that we think this is great and the council should do a study session perhaps, and staff should look into it more. But before something gets put in place, even with a long runway, I think we're going to just scare the crap out of our almost failing businesses as it is. I think we need to work towards that March 2022, but put in some heavy lifting in the next 6 to 8 months. That's my 2 cents.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Reyes?
Thank you. I took the advice of our one public comment from Drew. I went to the Costco Business Center, which is a volume business-oriented supply option, and I found the small compostable, looks like fiber, 6x6 clamshell at 13 cents per unit, which is substantially less than what's listed on the price analysis. So that's one data point. It's not comprehensive, but it might be worth sanity checking or just testing some of these numbers again. And it may well be that just in the course of a little less than a year, prices have come down. So, but with regards to next steps here for staff, I would support moving forward with advancing the county's model, and propose the addition of that staff explore if there's capacity to do advanced education, and that advanced education be both on, at least a practice of on request and secondly, education on the compostable options that are on the market and already cost competitive. Some of the stuff that's on Costco is less expensive than their plastic counterparts there. So there's probably stuff that is price equivalent, in some cases maybe better, or just a little bit more expensive. And with some advanced education, we might be able to tip some actors to go ahead, some restaurants to go ahead and make the move. I know that, you know, there is a segment of our residents that factor that into their decisions about what restaurants to go to. So, so that would be my recommendation.
Great, thank you. And I'll just finish up here. I also support moving forward with the county model. I'll pick up a point that Commissioner Nunes said. I like the upon request idea, but if it's going to dilute efforts, we have only so much capacity. I think the focus should be on March 2022, and going back to a point that Commissioner Robbins made is reaching out, education, and education particularly on availability and price. Because I'm hearing Commissioner Reyes found out what I found out when I did a very simple internet search looking at some big online retailers, is that there wasn't a difference in price. I think what might be interesting that hasn't been discussed is possibly acknowledging those businesses that have converted prior to March 2022 or after. I recall San Mateo used to have the Green Business Certificate. I don't know if we still have that program.
That program is still active, yes. It encapsulates more than just food facilities and more than just with the products they serve, but yeah, that program is still active.
Yeah, and I think that might be something worthwhile to notarize, some, you know, to bring attention to consumers that this business has stepped up to the plate. So something to consider. I'm not quite sure how that program works, but I do see some businesses around the city that do display that when I walk in and press on cleaners, for example, for to have services done. So that would be an important takeaway. So, you know, once again, I support the county model. We have the ability, the county's got the ability to start prepping businesses for March 2022, and so does the city. I'll just put this out as another idea as well. You know, we have study sessions, but if these study sessions were something called listening sessions, where maybe the city listens to suppliers, you know, in terms of availability and price of these of fiber-based compostable products and utensils and straws, or the city, you know, sharing with suppliers what the county's plans are moving ahead in 2022. So, and that might be a way to start to work in the supply chain aspects. So pretty much that's all I have to say. I could envision everyone. I think this is going to happen. I can almost see the single bag tempo again. That is cities adopting this ordinance city by city throughout the state, and then eventually the state coming in and doing a statewide. I'll just say a statewide movement towards fiber-based utensils and containers. So I could see that happening. So with all of that said, do we need to take a motion and make this recommendation? Is that the next step?
I mean, I think that was the feedback and direction I needed for next step.
Okay, so you have everything you need. Okay. All righty, then Andrea, thank you for your time as always, and we appreciate you distilling down for us a complex subject matter into digestible parts. Okay, great. Okay, everyone, we're going to wrap up this evening's meeting with any reports, announcements, anything anyone would like to share. Brad?
So yeah, I have update you for next month. We have to bring the small cells back to you for an update. And then intent is the public works maintenance plan. And then we have the item from tonight. We'll try to get back to you then as well. And just last week, if you didn't see the email you got, was sent to you from Cookie. It wasn't Cookie that's retiring at the end of the year. It's myself. So I'll probably have more to say at my last meeting in December. But it's been a pleasure to work with you all and the staff that I have here and my peers on the department heads and so forth. But it's been a pleasure to serve here in San Mateo as my last stop in public service. So thank you all.
Well, thank you.
Congratulations, Brad. I hope you have big plans for retirement. We're certainly going to be sorry to see you go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, here.
Yeah. Yeah, ditto, Brad. Sorry to see you go, because you really opened up the department in terms of the collection or input of public matters. So that's been much appreciated.
Well, we have a couple more months to kick you around, so.
Yeah, that's true. He's going to still be around, but
I mean to applaud your many.
There you go. And I'm glad there's no public comments right now, because I'm sure Drew would have something to say as well. So maybe he'll save that for another meeting.
Say that for another meeting. But I do seriously appreciate the transition that this department has done as it relates to incorporating public feedback into its planning and processes and ordinance development. I very much appreciate, and I know so do many other people. So everyone, our October 4th, 2020 Sustainability Infrastructure Commission meeting is
now adjourned. More reports and announcements, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, what was that?
So there are a few more reports and announcements.
Yeah,
please, okay, I'm sorry.
Before we get into that, I just want to confirm, I do believe our next meeting falls on Veterans Day, and we are instead planning to have the meeting instead of that Wednesday, that Thursday night. Has that been confirmed?
That is correct. Yeah.
So making sure the public is also aware of that. And then Andrea, I know, has a series of great announcements to share on the sustainability program.
Yeah, I just want to highlight a few announcements. One, there are just a few great programs that are going on right now. One is Bay Area SunShares, which is offering discounts to residents on solar and battery storage, or you can do them separately. You don't have to do both. So that is called Bay Area SunShares, and that program will run through November. And then I don't know if Rafael wants to speak to this as well, but there are exciting new electric vehicle rebates going on for residents in San Mateo County. So these are awesome programs that are going on right now. And then in addition, I'm hosting a few virtual workshops next week, and I'll be sure to follow up by email to make sure you guys see that announcement. But I'm hosting a native plant and pollinator garden workshop next Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock, and then the Zero Waste Chef workshop 10 a.m. on Saturday, October 24th. We're bringing in speakers for both of these workshops. So those are some exciting things going on. And then I also want to highlight that the city did receive a Beacon Program Award from the local, the ILG, Institute for Local Governments, recognizing our progress on our sustainability milestones. So I'm very excited that we were recognized for our reduction in energy facilities savings. So we got silver level for reaching 8%. And then we were also recognized for our community-wide greenhouse gas emission reductions, which you guys are all very familiar with because of our climate action plan. But we met certain milestones, so we gained a Beacon program recognition through the ILG. So that was very exciting.
Great.
Taking that prompt, yes, if I may. All great stuff at Andrea, and thanks for the prompt on Peninsula Clean Energy programs. Peninsula Clean Energy has opened up its rebates for up to $1,000 for electric vehicles starting on October 1st, and that will run through December 31st. So any San Mateo County resident that is buying a new electric vehicle, there's an opportunity for that. Just go to peninsulacleanenergy.com And Peninsula Clean Energy is also running rebate programs for EV infrastructure, so charging infrastructure for apartments, condominiums, workplaces, and there's free technical assistance available for that. And finally, technical assistance for building electrification for designers and developers who are looking to meet REACH codes. That is also a free service for in-depth technical assistance. So go to peninsulacleanenergy.com.
Great. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Through the chair?
Yep.
May I announce something as well? I actually just wanted to ask, staff with this opportunity about an item. We received a letter about touchless pedestrian intersections between our last meeting and this one, and I was just curious to see whether a staff member or a commissioner has yet responded to the letter, or whether there were plans to do so, or what might be the best next step.
Right. Can we take that offline? Is that possible? Can somebody respond to Adam?
Yeah, we can get a response to the whole commission in regards to that.
Okay.
So there has been some previous work on that already. She had reached out to us earlier, and Bethany Lopez of our staff has worked with Caltrans a little bit, but so we can get you some more information on that. That sounds fine.
Great.
Thank you. I also just wanted to acknowledge and thank staff for putting a something of a leaf blower update on the crystal ball. I realize it's not necessarily on one of our meetings yet, but it was something that was brought up in public comment last month during our meeting, and I forgot, frankly, to ask whether the commission would be interested in getting an update later. I am pleased to see it on the crystal ball. I think if we can get some form of update, that would be appreciated by those who are coming to the meeting. So thanks for that.
Okay.
Those are my comments. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Everyone, thank you for your time. The October 4th meeting is now adjourned. And once again, we'll be meeting not on Wednesday, November 11th, in observance of Veterans Day, but we will be meeting on Thursday, November 12th. So thank you. Have a good night and stay safe.